Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everybody. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on this full moon, January 15th, 2014. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And on my show tonight, I have Marcia Schafer, very fascinating individual. She's an animal communicator, an ET contactee, an all-around helper of humanity from a spiritual perspective. Can't emphasize enough how the fact that she does it from a spiritual perspective makes her a great asset to humanity. Spirituality is where it's at, even in this third dimension density of consciousness that we are forced to reside in. However, that may not necessarily be the case for much longer. We should have 4D on the mind. I'll be getting to that with Marcia a little bit today. Andromeda Council contactee Tolek and Franco De Nicola can tell you all about how we should all have 4D on the mind. But getting on, before I let Marcia on, as usual, I will cover the news. Headline here on Infowars.com, Bill Crystal, not the actor Billy Crystal, another Bill Crystal. It's sweet to die for the state. Lamette's reluctance of Americans to plunge headlong into total war. Well, you shouldn't want to go to war because the military is the last form of legalized slavery. They'll give you all sorts of medication while you're there in the military and against your will, and they'll poison you and whatnot, and like what it came with Agent Orange in Vietnam. I'm actually reading Jesse Ventura's book, 63 Documents the Government Doesn't Want You to Read right now, and I just finished the document on Agent Orange and how they were planning to screw people over with that. But don't join the military, folks. It's not in your best interest. Wars are all illusions anyway because the same entities funded from both sides and controlled from both sides. Next news story. Police tell reporters that they cannot film wastewater plant from public street. Police use, quote, color of law, unquote, so to speak, to deprive journalists of their unalienable free speech rights. Public street you can film from. Public sidewalk you can film from. You can chalk a public sidewalk. It's public property. They can't charge you with that, and filming is perfectly legal. Only when you're impeding other people's right to travel on that public street are you abusing your right, and then they can infringe upon you. But it's perfectly reasonable to film places like wastewater plants and nuclear plants that are putting us in grave danger. And speaking of nuclear plants, Discovery Channel, stop worrying about Fukushima radiation. Discovery Channel, you think you can learn a lot from them, and you can, but they will also distort the truth to a great extent on many things. In Fukushima, boy, are they distorting the truth like crazy. Jakari Jackson, Infowars reporter, has been on the West Coast measuring radiation levels, and they're pretty high. My God, I hate to sound like a fearmonger, and I have to be careful about because I will be 1 week from this upcoming Saturday be going to Los Angeles for the N5D City of Angels conference, and I actually posted a message on the Facebook pages for that event, and I said I think people should bring iodine to the event because we're being lied to about how bad the radiation is. We don't want it to affect the conference, and the person in charge of that Facebook page decided to delete it and told me the only reason she did that was because she didn't feel comfortable with me putting stuff on there that could be considered fear-mongering and go away from the infinite love mentality that they want people to have at the conference. And but I did send a message to the people in charge of the conference telling them that I'm willing to give 5 free drops of iodine to everybody at the conference while they're there. And if anybody asks me why am I doing it, I'm just going to say because I don't want Fukushima radiation being a hindrance to this conference. Enough said. Yeah, it's going to play a role on us in terms of what we can do from a spiritual perspective at the conference, and that's why I want to. That's why I wanted to help. But I have a feeling that people will not let me do that simply because they don't want me referencing Fukushima or anything like that at all. I mean, one of my pet peeves has always been people who insist we act like ostriches with our heads in the sand. Well, we're doing it for love purposes, the people would say for this conference. Well, you have to understand in this dimensional density, it's impossible not to have a little bit of fear. And sometimes acknowledging that a fearful thing exists may be the best way to get through something like this conference, which is supposed to raise love throughout planet Earth. So I hope they give me the chance to give out 5 free drops of iodine to everybody at the conference on each day of the conference. On a related note, next headline here, scientists baffled by mass sardine die-off on West Coast. Obviously from Fukushima, don't need to get into that any further. Wells Fargo denies plan to charge customers for domestic deposits. Well, considering the banks in Cyprus will just take money out of people's accounts at will, we have every reason to believe that Wells Fargo would do that. They're one of the 6 mega banks that that have most of the ownership in the Federal Reserve, global domination, and they want to charge us $5 fee for every paycheck deposited in checking or savings account. I'm glad I got rid of my account with Wells Fargo. They laundered let's say opium drug money, and yet they weren't prosecuted much. All they got was a fine that was just a drop in the bucket for them because they're too big to fail. Disgusting. Oh, this is a red link here. Obama announces plan to rule by executive order. Next phase of dictatorship proposed to save children and workers. Yes, you can't trust Obama when he wants to save children and workers when he says that. As Alfred Weber said on my show yesterday, he's involved in a global genocide. You obviously can't trust him. Andrew Barca said his soul was harvested from Saturn. Makes sense in terms of his behavior. All that theory about how he was a benevolent soul that was into the middle of a malevolent environment to suffer on behalf of humanity. Yeah, that was postulated, but it fell out of favor pretty quickly. And low-flying Homeland Security helicopter to test for radiation. Chopper will fly at altitude of just 10 stories for years to come. Well, can't really trust Homeland Security at all. I mean, they exist because of 9/11. 9/11 was an inside job, therefore Homeland Security exists for malevolent purposes. It's not rocket science, folks. And I don't really know the details, so I don't have time to get a look into it. I'll let Marcia on in a moment. Just want to quickly point out here, they're probably, if they really are testing for radiation, it's probably just to make the people think they are a little concerned about it, but they'll probably lie to us about how bad it is, just like they lie about everything. So, yes, Sean Cohen in the chat room here says, I think this is crazy that they are not addressing this. Yes, it is a serious matter, Fukushima and the radiation. But I don't think I should fearmonger anymore. I've talked about that enough. So without further ado, I will let Marcia Schafer on. I believe this is her, area code 480. Area code 480, is this Marcia?
It is. How are you?
I'm doing
Andrew,
great.
Can you hear me?
Watch your video. Yes, I can hear you. And
because your voice is going in and out.
My voice is what?
The sound quality is going in and out, so that's why I wanted to make sure you could hear me.
Okay, because I've had my share of problems with Blog Talk Radio, and one time my computer was echoing back at me, and none of my guests or listeners had that problem. So if whatever problem you have, it may just be a one-side issue because I'm not having any problems with you at all.
I'm hearing you just fine now. So thank you for having me on today. Interesting intro.
Yes. Well, I guess I might as well start. Is there anything you want to say to the audience just to get things started off? I did watch both your Project Camelot videos, both the videos you were in on that channel. Just wanted to point that out. But is there anything you just want to say to the audience they want to get out before we get started with the questioning and everything?
Let me get them acquainted with who I am and what I do so that they have an idea of what direction we'll go in today. Essentially, I've had a lifetime of extraterrestrial contact ever since I was a child. And in the 1990s, I came out and discussed this publicly with a book that I released called Confessions of an Intergalactic Anthropologist. From there, I went around the world, spoke to different audiences, educating them about what I had learned, what I had experienced, and what I felt it meant to us. From there, I stepped back a bit and decided to concentrate more on my private consulting practice. I'm an MBA business consultant who also has a very psychic side, and I thought that I could do greater good by, for a number of years, spending time working one-on-one with people to help them to activate themselves. And what I do currently is I engage people in a perspective where we look at their sole reason for being, and I'm able to see the lifetimes that they've incarnated into, the reasons for those lifetimes, and what they're here for now, and then I point them using my business expertise and my intuitive knowing towards what's coming towards us in the ensuing generations that we'll be facing, and how they can best face that by positioning in a humanitarian entrepreneurial perspective. So the extraterrestrial reality experience was a launching pad and a real training ground to give me a very unique perspective towards life, towards the world, and I like the name of your show because it really is all about getting a better grasp on the nature of reality. And when we're able to look in through these different perspectives, we're able to reassess who we are, what are we here for, and what can we do with our lives. Right now, as you started to allude to in some of the things you were talking about in your opening intro, the world's in a very interesting state, in a place it's not been before. And so we have a unique opportunity in front of us to act and behave in certain ways to be able to really plant the seeds of a whole new generation of humanity and to redirect our future in a way that can be very different from anything we've ever experienced before. But what I've learned through my experiences and those who teach me, what we have to do that is to change our perspective and change our understanding, and most importantly, take responsibility for ourselves. We can look at and point the finger towards corporations, entities, business structures, anything and everything that's out there. But, Andrew, it's true when the cliche is change starts within ourselves. It's really more than a cliche because all these organizations, all these structures, all these entities that are out there are comprised of people, one by one by one, people who make decisions. And each and every one of us who opens up to a greater understanding of what life is and what life can be, then provides a tremendous opportunity to do things differently and to change the world. So I think we have to light the fire one by one by one, and at the same time increase our tolerance level for those who think differently from us and see the world differently from us, because otherwise I think we're all going to go down in flames. So
you got that right. Oh.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say,
go on.
I was just going to say, so, while you have the tremendous experience, I've had the tremendous experience of a lifetime of direct face-to-face extraterrestrial contact, what's really been much more important is my gaining the understanding of what it means to be a human and a responsible, caring, and kind human at the same time. So we tend to get very caught up in the details and minutiae of extraterrestrial activity. At least many of the people who are looking into it are. Instead of it's really all about the deeper meaning of who we are and what are we going to do with this life.
Yes, and I'm glad you look at things from a very spiritual perspective. As I said, that's very important. And before we get into extraterrestrials, I think maybe we should have a save the best for last kind of attitude towards this. I guess less people are interested in the animal stuff that you do. But don't worry, folks, we'll get into the good ET stuff later. But since you talk about being an animal communicator, I mean, I don't actually own any pets. I did listen to an interview with that
woman
from Europe named Else.
What do you mean you don't own any pets? What's wrong with you? Can you tell I'm a bit of an animal advocate and lover?
Well, I'm kind of indifferent when it comes to animals. No love, no hate problem with them. I mean, I eat them as meat, so, I mean, what are you going to do? But anyway, I did listen to an interview with Els Baston on In5D Radio. She's one of the foremost people in the field of animal communication. And I don't remember much from that interview. It's not really something I'm really looking into, but maybe I'll learn something from you. I guess I may start with a specific question. It seems like cats are very unique when it comes to communication. One thing in particular is how cats, before someone dies, they can sense the person is about to die and go to that person. Yeah. I guess as a specific example, maybe get into that a bit, and then after you answer that question, you got the floor for a little bit on what animal communication. Talk about that.
Well, I first want to segue in is it was through the extraterrestrial reality experiences that led me to understand I could communicate with animals, because most of the beings in the universe, animals and those who are non-human intelligences, communicate in a particular way, which is what I tend to call holographic imaging, where they communicate in pictures and send the thoughts, and it's much faster than language. And so that knowing that and understanding that, when I first got into animal rescue work, I discovered I knew things about the animals that were all around us, and I was able to have the confirmation from the rescue groups that I worked with about the things that I noticed about the animals, and they would say, yeah, that's correct. And so I was able to gain the confidence to go forward and use my abilities in that manner. That's the background. Now, in regard to what you asked me about cats, it's not just the cats. Animals in general are aware of things that we tune out in our environment. I'm sure you may have heard of, dogs being able to sniff out cancer cells in the urine of people who have been afflicted with that particular disease. Cats have been known to spend a lot of time with humans who are about to transition. The animals are very sensitive to the energy fields around us that we dismiss as we go about our day-to-day business of pouring the cornflakes, getting in the car, going to work, paying the taxes, and getting the kids off to soccer and living our daily life. We forget about these things. Animals have different spectrums of how they interpret and are able to see the world. They have different hearing frequencies. They have different heightened sensitivities to smells, things that humans don't have. So cats are able oftentimes to pick up that the human soul is getting ready to separate. They can sense some of the physiological differences in the body as well as the psychological differences of the soul that is at that point where they're just ready to loosen themselves from the confines of what I call the biological unit, the body, and provide solace and are attracted to that person and will spend time with them. What other questions do you have on animals, and what direction do you want me to go on? Because I could just go in a million different directions for a long time.
Well, I'm not really an expert on it, so I don't really have too many questions. But I am kind of interested to know, can someone who's an animal expert like you offer any statements on communicating with plants and also maybe microscopic organisms like amoebas? Is that possible?
It is. The key is to tune yourself into the frequency of consciousness that an organism has. There's an ancient saying that we're all one. We all function at different frequencies of awareness. A unicellular organism is obviously nowhere near the same type of consciousness as a duck or a human being. But there is a level where you can tap in and understand its sense of awareness or being. And this is what psychics are able to do. Trees, plants, animals, organisms do have a type of consciousness where you can feel and understand what it is that they are. I don't know, I guess I want to say what is important to them, but that's a different level of understanding I'm attributing to them. But you can absolutely do that. Most of the time, it just takes slowing ourselves down, paying attention, releasing all of the distractions that are all around us, and going deeper within and listening to the harmonies of nature. And it'll just pop in. What I find happens when people are trying to open up their psychic abilities to these types of things, one of the great things that we do that is not so great is we tend to deny what comes in. So when a person is trying to do that, they're trying to tap into, to quote the famous book, The Secret Life of Plants, or something along that nature, they'll get an impression and they'll tend to poo-poo it and dismiss it, when actually that impression has a degree of accuracy that they should just allow to come in and experience. The best thing to do when you're trying to find out whether or not you're right is to find some type of situation where you can get documented feedback, such as if you're tracking a plant, you can look at how it thrives or how it doesn't thrive to a response. The great thing about plant life is there is a lot of scientific experimentation that's been done that shows that how well the plants respond to stimuli, to interventions. There's been some great work in the 60s and some great work done very recently in the past year or two on the consciousness of plant life and how it can respond. So it
Okay,
definitely has a type of consciousness. It's not as sophisticated. It doesn't have that level of personality necessarily as, say, an animal does.
Okay, I'm glad to know that. Just so you know, we do have a question from someone in the chat room, but before I get into that question, if anybody wants to call in, the call-in number is 646-478-4747. Question from Marcia. By all means, call in and ask. I'm always looking for more callers. But a question from Sean Cohen in the chat room. Says she has a male tabby age 3 named Romeo. She wants to know why he keeps licking his stomach. Is it a nervous habit or is there a problem there? And he is also sleeping under a lamp for some reason, only doing this recently, but the house and heat is on. Summary, why does he constantly lick his stomach? All the hair is gone there, and why is he now sleeping under a lamp when it is on? The house is warm.
I'm going to interject because, I'm not able to, diagnose or give any specifics to this particular situation. That's not what I do. But what I can tell her generalities is that first thing which she may or may not have done, is you take the animal to the vet, because 9 times out of 10, when an animal is having a problem or manifesting as a behavioral problem, it's a physiological root cause of the situation. And if the animal is, licking the stomach and the hair is gone, then it's likely that there's some type of irritation or something deeper within the GI system that needs to be looked at. Usually those aren't nervous types of situations. They're symptomatic of a deeper physiological cause. And the cats, do like to sleep under lamps, even if the house is warm. They like that extra warmth that comes off, and they particularly seek it when they don't feel well, as well as when they do feel well. You'll find them doing that more and more. So I really recommend that she takes her cat to the veterinarian for a checkup to see what is going on. It could be anywhere from something simple to something more complex, and I would encourage her to do that. I don't want to go into it any deeper over this type of situation. But my work is over and over has shown that generally it's a physiological thing that's going on with the animal that's causing a behavioral response.
Okay, I hope that helps. By the way, I don't know if this is in your field, but I've always heard about how we're not getting the proper medicine because MDs are only trained to treat the symptoms, not the causes. Just, do you by any chance know if veterinarians are forced to do the same thing, treat animals, just the symptoms
like
and not the causes?
The doctors, it's up to each veterinarian. There's some great veterinarians that are out there. Some of them are holistic. There's even a holistic veterinarian professional group out there that the vets will belong to, that you can find one in that distinction. Some of them practice Chinese medicine. Some of them actually have their own intuitive abilities. You just got to find the right one for you. So you'll know when you go to a practitioner and if it doesn't feel right and they're trying to force certain things. Always with any medical intervention, there's protocols that need to be followed that they are going to do to be responsible practitioners. And they may recommend certain medications, but a good vet is going to tell you what are the ups and downs of this, what's the likelihood, and they'll even bring in, this is what the cost of the situation is, and this is what the realistic outcome is likely to be. What is your choice that you want to do? So, you want to look for those signs. I always believe deeply that it is a balance between allopathic and holistic medicine, and that there's not always one answer for everything. Everybody's situation is unique. But when it comes to a vet, don't be afraid to leave a vet who isn't very good to go seek another one and get recommendations from people and see what they like. Always look within the animal community and the rescue community because they know who's good and who's the best that's out there. So do they have to follow certain protocols? Of course they do. But they also have their own distinct judgment, and a good vet knows what's up, what works. They'll be aware of rescue remedies and homeopathic interventions. The best thing that I like to see is a vet who's up on their nutrition, because the nutrition and what goes into the pet food, there's some really garbage out there, and that can affect the pet's health dramatically, from the quality of their fur to respiratory symptoms to distress to food that makes them very, very healthy. And each pet has different needs as to what's going to respond to them, but go for a quality pet food, definitely, along with looking for an animal medical practitioner that meets your needs and is smart.
Yeah, it's a shame us humans, all because of the Rockefellers here in America. They create a medical monopoly, so only MDs are the ones who can do stuff in America. Glad it's not exactly that bad with veterinarians. I hope they don't try to do that with veterinarians.
Well, in some ways, in some it's very state to state, and they can be very, strict. But, veterinarians, as I said, definitely have to adhere to strict medical protocols, just like the medical practitioners who are doctors. And with the doctors, when you go that blanket, all doctors stink and they're all bad, that's not fair, Andrew. That's not helping people make good choices. There are good doctors. There are doctors that are not so good. There are doctors that practice holistic medicine. The good doctor is the one who listens and pays attention to the patient and, makes appropriate decisions that are in the best interest of the patient, collaboratively with the patient too. So I can't go along with the doctrine of dismissing all medicine. I mean, you talk to a cancer patient who holistic didn't work, but chemotherapy did. Chemotherapy makes us go, oh my God. But for the people whose lives it saved, how can we condemn such a thing when there aren't other alternatives for them that worked? Holistic doesn't always work for everybody. I mean, I'm somebody who walks both sides of the fence, and I've gotten as woo-woo and had the craziest experiences that you've ever have heard of. But at the same time, we have to look logistically and practically at the world that we live in, and we have to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of things that do work that may not fit the paradigm of our expectations of how we want to live. What happens a lot in the new age community, I think, is that there's a lot of tendencies to want to have thought imagery work, things that just don't work on this planet for us at this point of where we are in our level of evolution. We want to think things away. Do they have a place? Absolutely. Can they work? Absolutely. But not always and not for everybody. So, and it's a blending. And when we condemn, entire doctrines, sometimes we lose what's also good in them. So I just want to open your eyes to that a little bit. It's easy to say,
and my mother
is...
Yeah, but that's the thing. My mother is an eye surgeon who makes over $100,000 a year. She's that respected, and I showed her a video talking about how all because of the Rockefellers of the medical monopoly and all, she can only practice allopathic medicine. And her answer was, well, if people don't want to come to me, they have other options. But I always make sure to tell her, I don't blame you and the MDs. I blame the Rockefellers because they're the ones who are responsible for you being able to practice what you practice and not being able to
Actually,
do other
I'm going
things.
to change that. And this is the perspective I come from. It's not about blaming the Rockefellers. It's about blaming us. Because one of the things that humanity has done is just accepted whatever comes down the way and doesn't think about it or question it or reject it. And that's one of the major things that I'm all about and that I've learned, that it's all about thinking carefully, looking what's under the rock, making a well-thought-out choice, and not just accepting everything. Look at how humans just roll over, basically. And we talk about pets, and I think of a dog just rolling over in response to things. And if we stood up and smartly demanded differences in what is available to us, there would be a response to that. It may be a bit of a turmoil, it may be a bit of a fight, it may be a bit of a challenge, but if we demanded a different situation from the world around us and what it offers us, we'd get it. There's an old saying, I'm not one for, I'm not into conventional religion or anything or biblical cliches, but when they talk about being a brother's keeper, we really are in this time and age because we've got to now take responsibility for everything that's out there and start within ourselves to make the change happen. And, if there's unacceptable options or unacceptable behavior and violence, then it's up to us to say, all right, we're going to rise up, we're going to demand that something needs to be done about this, we're going to perhaps ideally offer realistic interventions to change it and do it. But we are lazy, lazy, lazy people. And if you feed us and you keep us happy and you give us a toy like TV or Twitter, don't worry about us. We've been placated, we've been medicated, and we won't make a sound. it will go away.
Yeah, and I decided I wasn't going to be a sheeple just like all those people who just let things happen. But moving on the subject of animals, a couple more things I guess we can discuss before we get into good ET things. But this is actually related to ETs, actually. Whales and dolphins. I've always been fascinated with them as a kid, and I've heard ET contacts say that there are dolphins and whales on extraterrestrial councils, and they have come to here on Earth as a purpose. Now, let me make it clear, not all dolphins and whales are benevolent. There's a mixture of malevolence and benevolence in this reality. But as someone who contacts with animals, is there anything special that you can talk about in regards to dolphins and whales about the stuff I said?
Dolphins and whales, in terms of being special, there's two ways to look at it. One, they have a higher intelligence, first of all, that we can relate to and anthropomorphize. I personally think that they have, not personally, I mean it's been scientifically proven, they have very sophisticated communication systems, very sophisticated relationships within their pods, and it's just that the average human doesn't understand this and so can't relate to it. As far as the extraterrestrial component, many, many people out there have attributed this to them. I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you what I believe. I believe that there have been cetacean species that have, whether it's in different realities or different planetary systems, that have been more evolved. And I think that there's a vestigial hereditary memory of that somewhat within ourselves. I also believe that the ancient lost continent of Atlantis, which conventional world says doesn't exist, but within the New Age community, many people say does exist, and there's a lot of, certainly around the world, evidence of lost civilizations within countries and also under the ocean. I believe that was a major icon of that civilization, and that there was a connection that perhaps goes back to extraterrestrial contact. So I suspect that there is something out there, but I don't know. I'll always make the distinction between what I know, what I believe, and what I suspect. I base what I know on first-hand experience, what I've seen, what I've observed. The other times I have to make inferences based on what I've been taught by other species or what I've just come to believe on my own. The reason I do that is there is so much information out there in the extraterrestrial reality, in those realms, that really just comes from channeled information or somebody coming up with their own conjectures or on their meditations or on a hallucinogenic drug experience that aren't necessarily coming from the same place as a witnessed reality. The repository of information about extraterrestrial reality is filled with a lot of I think so, but I don't know. What I mean by that is that we don't have any way to really find out who's telling the truth and who isn't. And a lot of times when people even have personal experience, it's colored by their own limitations and perceptions of what they're able to understand. And a lot of my experiences involved a lot of training on that particular vein of thought, in particular of learning about human cognition, how to wake up strands of your consciousness to pay attention to what's going on. I also learned not to believe everything that is necessarily told to me, which we can get into in a little bit later. So the consciousness that we have, for those of us who are very comfortable with the idea of extraterrestrial phenomenon being real, is really littered with a lot of muddied waters. And the average person, unless you're having a direct face-to-face contact or relationship with someone or a species, we don't have a necessary way to sift it out. We're really reliant on what I call the storytellers. And I even consider myself one of those quote-unquote storytellers because I know what's real and what isn't from my perspective, but you don't, and your audience doesn't. And I always want people to question everybody because there's a lot of distinctions between what I've experienced and what I've heard other people talk about and what they say is real or is out there. And who's to say what's right? I'm right according to my perception and paradigm of reality, but they feel that they are too. Excuse me. So I know I kind of got off on the track, but it's such an important track of our trying to figure out what's out there. So when it comes back to the idea of dolphins and whales, they certainly represent to us today, for the most part. I know you said there's always just variations on the behavior, and there can be those that act out in a way that is not so loving and peaceful. The paradigm is usually perceiving them as intelligent, loving, peaceful species. And I suspect that it's very possible that there is a cetacean-based species that either existed at one time or may even be out there. I have found that many of the races and species that are out there have some type of semblance to a life form here on Earth. So that also raises a lot of questions as to what the connection can be or may be. So, the dolphins and whales, and I hear talk about these councils that are out there, and they don't always match what I've experienced. And there's so many stories. We have to all work together to put together what's out there until the time comes that extraterrestrial reality is brought out into the open, and we have real documented situations that we can begin to learn from. Humanity has been stripped of the opportunity to learn about this. There's no ET Wikipedia, so to speak, that's out there. Documentaries, again, are based on the storytellers, the people who do hypnotic regression therapies, ancient lore and evidence and things we can pick up. We have to really work at picking this out apart and putting it back together again in a way that fits. So, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned and alien councils briefly. I wanted to get into that because that ties into what I was talking about having fourth dimension on the mind earlier in the intro. A couple of things to point out. In my interview with Alfred Weber last week, he talked about how Andromeda Council contactee Tolek, who he had been in contact with those for several days already, says that January 1st, Earth is in 4D. Actually, December 21st, 2012 was when the core of the Earth, the star in the center of the Earth, which is actually a star, we're being lied to about what's in the Earth, it blossomed into 4D. And over time, up until January 1st, Earth is in 4D. And Franco De Nicola said on a radio show yesterday that he's a unified soul who remembers his past lives. He said that today, the full moon between two new moons in the same month, which is kind of rare, is the day that all of Earth is in 4D, and the only thing is us humans have to recognize that, and the magic number of maybe like 25-30% would have to realize that in order for the planet to ascend into 4D, and some say we'll go straight into 5D. Can you offer any take on any of that stuff that I have just said?
You're not going to like it. Because the reason I say that and I laugh is that I think, what difference does it make whether in 42D or 5D? What's important to me is how are we behaving and how are we living here? And how are we acting? And what are we going to do to put ourselves in a situation where we advance to a more sophisticated, peaceful civilization? So when people bring up these things that, we're in 4D or this happens on this and that date, it doesn't make a bit of difference to me. Those are not the big questions, because it doesn't make a difference to the average person. If you take your car and you drive down the street there in Pennsylvania and you look over to your left and you look over to your right, do you think they care about that? Do you think they're noticing anything? What we need to do is to get people to behave in different ways and to think more kindly and considerately of each other. So do these labels and these considerations make that much of a difference? Because opportunities are out there. The realities around us are fluctuating constantly, and it's about which one we tune into. From my training and my experience, it's always been that there's infinite potential. Every single reality is out there, and they're just unfolding all around us, some of them in fractalian patterns. It's up to us, by using the strains of consciousness and self-awareness, to choose which one we associate with and what reality drama will unfold before us. So, that comes from our own inner attention and determining what are we looking at, what is the world, how do we want to interact with it, and who do we want to be. That matches our frequency up to the reality strains that are out there. So to have the blanket statement that on April 15th of 2013 or 2015, whatever date that there's this type of conjunction and the world will face this condition, it may be interesting and fun to look at. But you also have to remember that those of us who look at those types of things are a very small component of the population of the world. And the population of the world is comprised of the masses, those people who go about everyday ordinary reality as it's dictated to them and don't look at those things. Is it going to influence them? No. Is it going to influence me or you? Who knows? Those of us who are looking at different things and have our enlightenment path as a priority for us and are focusing at a different frequency, maybe. But, is it that important, Andrew, to say that it's 4D, 5D, or this is going to happen? I'm bringing this up and I'm lambasting this perspective a little bit because how many times over and over again have we heard people within our community go, this is going to happen on a certain day, or the dark side of the moon is going to open up and we're going to discover that it's been populated there by another species and by the Chinese. I'm making these things up, whether they're true or not, who knows. And prediction after prediction after prediction comes in, and nothing ever happens. Life doesn't change. What I'm interested in is life changing, not necessarily changing, but improving, and improving for the better. So I'm needling you a little bit in your thought purposes purposely, because the importance from what I've learned in all my training and all my experience with every different species that I've been with has been about, again, bringing it back. The onus is on us. And what are we going to do to make a real difference? So these things are really, intriguing, and they're nice pathways to go down, but how much of an impact is it going to have? So it doesn't matter if we're in 3D, doesn't matter in what you call 5D or 4D, we're still living the same, aren't we, Andrew? Did you expect me to give you this hard a time? Did you think it was going to be a more fun interview?
No, the answer you gave isn't all that shocking at all. I mean, I think I might as well just throw it out that Alfred Weber also talked about how there should be a consciousness shift of great proportions in early 2017 because he's spoken with people who are extraterrestrial contactees who are saying things that only their higher contacts are telling them in regards to when things are going to happen. And Alfred talked about how people are being taken up to ships now and being spoken to about the consciousness shift that is supposed to happen late 2016, 2017. I personally don't think that we should obsess about it, because if we obsess about that, we're going to lose touch with reality. All through December, I was saying on my show, we may ascend into 4D, us humans, in January, but I wouldn't obsess about that, because if you think it's going to happen, you'll lose touch with reality. So I think it's best to go through life not thinking that will happen, but still live life to the fullest nonetheless. That's the way I look at it.
The corollary side of that is the humanitarian actions. I do believe that there is the great potential for a new type of age of enlightenment, and I'm not talking about anything that was ever seen in the Renaissance period a few hundred years ago. I'm talking about something very profound. And that's why I'm needling you a little bit, because this is about a very important window of time. We have an opportunity that's unprecedented to make a different future and to have this age of enlightenment, to have a period where humans are more highly conscious. There's several things that are going on behind it that are very, very basic, looking at the civilization we have now, and some are more esoteric. The very basic aspect of the window that is unprecedented has to do with the science of technology. We are living in a manner that we have not lived in before. We have an access to each other around the globe, a communication process that we've never had before, that's unprecedented within recorded history. We have the ability to know new things through new arms of science, through not only quantum science, genetic science. Artificial intelligence is coming up as a whole new field, which is going to raise to and elevate the field of consciousness as a science to a new level never before seen. And then there are other things that are happening that are my own theory based on my experience and training with other teachers, as we've alluded to, which is that I believe that the Earth, as we know, it's not a stable, stationary orb. We're moving through positions in space-time, is moving to new positions in space-time, which in turn is giving us the opportunity to be influenced by The best way I can call it is different types of quote-unquote cosmic particles, because I don't even have names for these things. But it's almost as if we were being exposed to a different type of weather. And these cosmic particles, if we're being exposed to a new design of this, have the opportunity to interact with us at a genetic level, to change our biology and our conscious awareness in certain ways that are unprecedented, and that also give us opportunity. So that's the esoteric side of the equation, for which there isn't scientific proof for. But that's one of the things that I believe is happening at this time. So this is a very powerful window, a very powerful vortex, and why I'm needling you affectionately to say, so what? It's about what are we doing now to make changes. You will even see evidence if you move yourself out of what I call the CNN version of reality, and you look around the world. There is a tremendous movement of people who are doing humanitarian ventures, businesses, opportunities, entrepreneurships, ventures that benefit all of us as a species. Instead of, I got to make $1 million by the time I'm 31. It's about the quality of life over the current number that is in the bank account. And there is a huge, huge continuum of people that are moving in this direction, and the vortex on this is growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is part of what we're talking about in terms of the changeover and what I call the new 21st century age of enlightenment. But if we don't nurture and tend this period in rightly, we'll lose the opportunity. And the Earth will take a trajectory that will end up in a time-space continuum that will not have as strong an element of a humanitarian perspective. When I say humanitarian, I mean all species. And we won't have the opportunity for an advanced society. Having an advanced civilization right now is crucial, because we are about to face a new window of going back out into space and space pioneering. It's going to pick up with tremendous acceleration. And as I've said over the years, you don't go back out into space without finally answering the conundrum of who's out there, because you don't go out and see what's out there without seeing who's out there. It is unable to be extricated from space pioneering, and that's where we're going to. I covered a wide range of things there. I'll let you take your pick of what direction you want to go in.
Yeah, I do actually have a direction I want to go in, and I'm going to have to ask that you try to bear with me for maybe several minutes as I explain this, because one subject of extraterrestrial research that's been so highly debated is the accuracy of Zecharia Sitchin's work. And I remember you said in one of your presentations on Project Camelot YouTube channel, you said that your ET contacts who you spoke with told you to look at Zecharia Sitchin's work. Now, I need you to bear with me here. This is going to get a little confusing, but I'd like to get into why Zecharia Sitchin's work is so hotly debated. First of all,
I'm familiar with the reason why, but if you want to get into it for your audience, let's do that. But if you want to do it for my education.
I've got into it. Well, maybe you could back up what I say after I get into this, but there are several things going on here. First of all, Andrew Bartzis, the Akashic Records reader who I mentioned earlier, he said on an interview on the Creating 5D YouTube channel that Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books were extremely accurate. He was off in regards to the exact time period that the events happened, and he was also off. The Anunnaki did not come from Nibiru to Earth to get gold to shield their atmosphere. They were actually lured to Earth by other dimensional entities, and they were mining the gold and the other minerals. They traded humans as a slave species to mine the gold and the minerals to lure other entities back to Earth. And he said after Sitchin wrote his 3rd book, his timelines got really off and whatnot. That's why he said his first 3 books are accurate. But people said really inauspicious things about Sitchin. I've said this before, but I guess I'll say it again for new listeners. First of all, Leo Zagami, 33rd degree Freemason who became a whistleblower, said on Project Camelot that Sitchin was a Illuminati disinfo agent who got his info from the satanic cult known as the Vatican. Yeah, it's a satanic cult. And in David Icke's documentary Revelations of a Mother Goddess, Arizona Wilder, a mind-controlled slave of the Illuminati, said that Sitchin was a shape-shifting reptilian alien who had the job of disinforming humanity about the reptilians and the Illuminati. And David Icke said, well, that might explain why Sitchin warned me not to say anything about the reptilians in my work after I asked him why he never said anything about Sumer's reptilian motifs in his work. And I spoke to Andrew Bartzis about this, and I asked him, how can Sitchin have been accurate if he was a reptilian disinformer? And Andrew Bartzis told me that timeline watchers that are watching over timelines that we're in would often implant things into the media and whatnot to try to spread disinformation, and as such they implanted this into Zagami and Wilder to make them spew out this disinformation. And apparently, if that's the case, then Alfred Weber, my guest on last week's show, he was wrong about all the evidence he gave that Sitchin was a disinfo agent when I brought him up, because I'm thinking maybe all that stuff that Alfred Weber said that that showed Sitchin was a disinfo agent, maybe that info came from those same timeline watchers who brainwashed Zagami and Wilder. So what can you say about all this? Yes,
I have a lot to say, and I love that you brought this up. And I think if you had read my book, you might understand a little bit more, because I went into it in Confessions of an Intergalactic Anthropologist, and I think this is really important. First of all, as I plainly wrote in my book, I was directed to look at his work, and they said he was close but wrong. And I want to get back to that in a second, but I want to address another part of what you said. I want to point out what was really, I feel, harmful about Sitchin's work and what I feel was terrific about Sitchin's work. And it's the bigger picture I think we need to focus on before I get into the details. The bigger picture is what Sitchin did for us is he was one of the people who got us off of the either or conventional way of thinking about, is it evolution or is it, divinity that is responsible for humankind, that either or conception that you have to belong in one camp or you have to belong in divine evolution or divine creation. And he brought in this other strain, which is the possibility of alien genetic tinkering, which is a very plausible intervention, particularly with all the knowledge we have now. The harmful thing that came about it is that, once again, we humans patterned ourselves. We're a big proponents that this is the answer, this is the only answer. This is what it is. It was these people called the Anunnaki from this planet Nibiru, and this is exactly what happened. We weren't thinking independently, which is what I nag people over and over again. Start thinking intelligently and start thinking independently. So a large vein of thought came into this is what happened. Andrew, nobody knows what the heck happened. I don't care who you are, what kind of psychic you are, what timeline you're viewing in, even the extraterrestrials who have given me information, which I'm going to share with you in a moment about what they told me. Nobody knows, and we will never know. We have to be responsible and think about it in terms of this is either a likely or an unlikely scenario, because there is no way to unpeel that piece. We can start to put things together and we can conjecture, but no one's going to have the ultimate answer. Now, with that, you want me to go into a little bit of information of what I was told?
Yeah, by all means. What did your ET contacts tell you?
Now, again, I've been trained enough to know that when I'm given information, I know it's not absolute. It can be the position of whoever I'm interacting with, but it's not necessarily any different than you and I talking. You're saying, this is what it is and this is the truth. I've learned to think independently. So what was positioned to me was that the reason they wanted me to become familiar with his work, and you have to remember, when this happened and I was told this was back in the early 1990s, quite a long time ago. It was before Sitchin became famous, when he was just beginning to step out there, that I was directed to learn more about his work. So what they told me is that their human was a genetically derived species, and they wanted me to become familiar with his work because he was introducing that concept. They said that there was a race here at the time that genetically tinkered with the primate on the planet, but it wasn't a hybrid of just one, such as Sitchin espoused it was the Anunnaki human hybrid. They said that there were multiple variations of DNA strands that were used. Genetic material was used, they said, from 12 different species to actually create the current vehicle of human that is here now. And that we are a multi-hybrid, and certainly not just the Anunnaki. So they literally said he was close but wrong. The other thing they told me was something interesting where I don't have I've studied genetics in college, and, I'm having a medical background, certainly know a little bit more than the average person about it. But what they told me was an interesting concept, and I think you might like this. They said that the process that was used to get the DNA strands to cohere together and function into a unit was what they called sonic resonance. And they said that the scientists of that time who were here knew how to use vibrational frequency, sonic resonance, to be able to manipulate genetic material. Now that I thought was something very intriguing. So what they told me is that we're a hybrid race, and that there were 12 different, what we would call today alien races, whose genetic material was cherry-picked to create the human. Now, there's another thing that was added to that at another time. They said, however, that they were not aware of the fact that some of the, I guess I could call them recombinance factors, would combine in a way that there was a genetically, non-dominant combination, a recombinant factor that helped to create the violent tendency in the human today. It's kind of like a little boo-boo, I can call it. And that was responsible for our violent tendencies today that we have, unless we learn to control them and master that situation. And they said that was due to genetic error, of not recognizing something that was in there, that when the two combined, over time it was a recessive characteristic that actually ended up out into the population to a greater degree. Do I know if that's true? No. Do I think it's fascinating? Absolutely. And that's the way that I think we need to look at all this stuff, and not say, my information is correct, and this is what they told me, and this is what it is, and this is what's going to be. Again, we need to mine the fields of what we all know and say, these are some intriguing possibilities. Let's see where we can go in concert with contemporary science to decipher these types of things and what's going on. If you hear snurfling in the background, I have to say it's not me. It's one of my cats just came in, and he's having a sneezing fit. So.
No, the only thing I can really... No, I could just hear a voice. I thought maybe that was just the radio breaking up or something. You are breaking up a bit.
That's my little Darwin who's going all over the place. So anyway,
okay.
Did that help answer your question and provide another look into the window of all this information that's out there with what they told me in regard to Sitchin?
Oh, yes. I don't think you could have explained it any better than the way you did, and I must commend you for trying to explain that. You used the nobody knows response. Well, in a sense, that's true. Even an Akashic Records reader like Andrew Bartzis cannot argue with the fact that many of the truths we cling to depend heavily on our point of view, as Obi-Wan Kenobi told Luke Skywalker.
I agree with him wholeheartedly.
Yes. But since we mentioned your contacts, I think I should have probably got into this before we got onto this Sitchin stuff. Could you give us general information on your contacts? Who are they? Where do they come from? What dimension they come from? How much of their body is light? And any of the important general stuff about your ET contacts in regards to history and the science behind them.
Well, the contacts started when I was in the crib. I want to give the background. This is important to lead up to this, to answer your question. And I would have these experiences. I didn't know who it was or what was going on. And as a young, a toddler, I couldn't figure it out, and I wouldn't know which life was real. And I kept it very, very quiet for a large part of my life. I just couldn't figure it out. And it was very interesting. The couple times I tried to bring things up, you have to remember I grew up in born in the late 50s, grew up in the 60s, and it was a very different time then. And, of course, you're shut down, and you just learn very quickly not to bring it up. So I had all these things that happened, and I just tucked them away. And when I came back in the morning, I would just say, that's not real. Here I am. This is where I belong. This was the easier life to live. And it really wasn't until my 30s when I began a different level of interaction and understanding. And also by then, I had not only matured as a person, I'd also gained a lot of education. I had a medical background, a business background. I had a lot of things under my belt, which gave me an enhanced sophistication of understanding what was going on. In my 30s, I began to have much more intensive interactions with these different species where I learned more about them and who they were. Now, I'll give you just a synopsis of a few. Basically, there were many that I don't know what the heck they are, and I've learned that the names that we give them or that we tend to call them in the popular culture for this type of thing don't always hold much meaning, and they're more for our ability to categorize them rather than being accurate. They talk about names more as they respond often more to the vibrational frequency than an actual name. The ones that I've encountered on more frequency are, obviously, there's humanoid ones, which people like to call Pleiadian. I've had a lot of reptilian encounters I want to go into in a minute. When we talk about the grays, I suspect that there's 2 or 3 different variations of them based on my own experience and over time. I know that there are people who say, oh, these are just androids, they're not real. I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. God, what else there? And there's a number of other races that I go into and that I wrote about. But I want to stop for a minute because one of the most controversial ones are the reptilian ones, and I think this piece is important. My experience with the ones that are reptilian do not match at all with the boo, as I like to call it, mentality that's out there. And these horrible things that are talked about with the reptilians, I've never personally experienced it. I've seen a civilization that cares about the youth and the young and has a strategic perspective to tomorrow, very different from we as humanity are. We tend to deal in the immediacy of now and don't look at our species in terms of developing the best of the best and looking at the future and what future generations will look at. We may talk about it and give it lip service, but our world is a mess, and there's not really a culture that truly does that here. There was a references to what I call our equivalent of arts and literature, but I didn't see any of the details of it. I've never had any of these experiences that are horrific or eating babies in the White House or whatever it is that's said out there. There's never been any attempt to coerce my attitude or viewpoint. Many of the ones that I've seen have had what I'm assuming would be the equivalent of a uniform or something on. I've seen 2 different variations of what they look like. The best way I can use to explain it is I go back to what we have here on Earth, and that one of them had more of a longer head, almost the way like crocodiles or something, that longer type, and another one had a head that would be more like a frog or a big, heavy, bulbous type of head. And I got the feeling from what they were trying to indicate to me, there were several of them in a line, and they wanted me to look at them, that they were trying to get me to pick up and distinguish the physical variations as a species variation of what they were trying to get me to understand about them. So that's why I'm always so leery when I read all these things about people say that they're trying to influence not just the lexicon, but the viewpoint of how people think, when we don't really know what is truly out there and what's going on, because I've never experienced any of this horrible stuff that people talk about with the reptilians at all. I found them to be a thoughtful, advanced civilization. Now, having said that, I am smart enough to know that I also know that there's a lot out there that I may not have witnessed, and I learned this very deeply from extraterrestrial contact, that what you're always saying is just a tiny piece of the puzzle. And when in past talks, I've referenced the fact that, for example, say I was a tourist in Russia and I was taken around and I saw the best things. I'd never been there. I'd never met the people. And I wasn't shown the gulags, the slums, the bad or poverty-stricken part, the crime-ridden parts. Should I be naive enough to think that it doesn't exist? No. It just means I didn't experience it. So I am saying that from my own personal perspective. I have never experienced many of the things that people talk about with the reptilians, and I've found that many of the sources for the reptilian smashing, as I like to call it, comes from channeled information. tell you, Andrew, channeled information does not come close to face-to-face experiences. I've experienced a lot of channeled information in my lifetime, but it's very different. And you really don't always know who you're talking to. You think you do, but you don't. And I think that a lot of channeled information is someone's higher consciousness, or they're tapping into some spirit type of thing, and they just accept it wholeheartedly and say, yeah, that's what it is. That's what's out there. So, there's a lot out there. If you look at the variation of life on planet Earth, besides the fact you've got mammals and reptiles and amphibians and birds and, everything out there, and you have all kinds of life forms. Look at the planet here, and even you look at the marine aquatic life forms that are so foreign to us when we see them. Just imagine with the infinity of space and what's capable of being out there. Now, that being said, there is what I think you were starting to allude to. I also have had experience with those who no longer have a body. And one of my first encounters with that was there was a race that appeared before me, and they would often appear, they looked Slavic to me. They had almost a hint of Oriental in their eyes, and they would often wear a white robe with a sash that was often gold or a color. And at one point, decades ago, they said, you no longer need to see us this way. This was for your benefit that we've appeared to you. And they appeared as like an energy formation right in front of me. And they said, this is our true form. This seemed to be a much higher form of being. The way that I have always distinguished extraterrestrial reality has been in two classifications. Those that I was originally talking about, the biological life forms that are out there, and those that no longer have need for a physical body. My experience has been that those that no longer have need for a physical body have tended to be much more spiritual in nature and of a much higher evolution. I've also encountered those that we would tend to call masters because they are at such an advanced evolution of awareness. They react very differently with us. My experiences with them have been that they're very self-deprecating. There's a deep sense of humor, and they often try to get you to look at yourself in ways that get you to get rid of the ego and to smile and laugh at the folly of yourself sometimes. This is where my deepest, most profound training and lessons have come from, is working with those that are in the non-biological form, the ones I'm more interested in. Right now, as you've probably gleaned from our conversation, and you indicated in your introduction of me, it really is all about the spiritual pathway for me. And, in myself and trying to turn that light on in others too. So there is a host of information out there that we are not aware of. There are so many infinite life forms that we're not aware of, yet we tend to dwell on the ones that are in the common UFO culture. We need to be open, we need to be aware, and we need to I like to be optimistic about what's coming our way and what we're going to discover.
Yes, I want to get into the subject of reptilians for a little bit here, because you mentioned you never had contact with any bad ones. Well, that doesn't surprise me at all, because Andrew Bartzis did say that there's 18 species of reptilian influencing reality on Earth, and only one is evil. Now, you can make a case there, because that one group that's evil, which comes from Alpha Draconis, has branched off into clone groups that come from Sirius B, Orion, and Hydra. It's a matter of point of view in regards to...
Where's Andrew getting this information? Is it from his own
He's an Akashic
Records
reader. He's an Akashic Records reader. That's where he gets his information from. He can and what am I supposed to just assume he's lying about what he's saying? I mean, if he lied about it.
I'm saying I don't know where he gets the information from. That we all have something to contribute, and we all come from our viewpoint. So I don't know whether he's accurate or not. I met many people who say that readers. I don't know. I'm not saying he's not accurate. I'm saying I don't know. But to accept it as an absolute, I just say, okay, this is one of many possibilities.
Yeah, but the way I look at it is it makes sense to use him as a source, because his skills have the ability to get the correct answer. And realizing that, I think it makes perfect sense to use him as the first source you mentioned right off the bat, because the fact that he can access the Akashic Records means he's probably got it right, unless somehow malevolent entities have managed to toy with his mind. But I wanted to, staying on the subject of the reptilians, one thing I've heard about the malevolent reptilians, actually two things, and I want to get your take on them. First of all, some people say if a malevolent reptilian is in your presence, just try to love them, and they will not hurt you because they can't stand love. But Alex Collier, a prominent ET contactee, said, no. If you run into a malevolent reptilian, you can love them all you want. There's no hope for you. You're going to get torn apart, and you're going to get eaten. Okay, so we got two conflicting viewpoints there. So if you run into a malevolent reptilian, are you screwed, or should you try to love them and you'll be okay?
I have absolutely no idea because I've never had the encounter. But I will tell you that I have been trained by those who work with me to, whenever I come into a situation that I am not comfortable with, I have been trained since a child that I am to focus my consciousness on what we as humans call the God presence and not let anything sway it, and to create that field around me. And it has worked when situations I've encountered that I've not wanted to be in. It has changed the frequency and gotten me right out of there. But I don't know, because realistically, since I've never encountered it, I mean, would that be the same thing as, somebody mugs you with a gun and you say, I love you, man, and they shoot you in the head? I don't know. But I know for me, whenever I focused on a switch in consciousness, that has always been the what I affectionately call the get-out-of-jail-free card, and that it allows us to move throughout time-space reality very comfortably and very cleanly.
Yes, one final thing on the reptilians. Maybe you might be able to answer this because you're spiritual. There's been a little bit of a debate as to what dimension the reptilians come from. Most people say the lower fourth, but in reality, when they say the lower fourth, they're referring to the interdimensional plane that exists between the third and the fourth dimension, where there is no energy source. And as the theory goes, they need to come into this reality to use human fear energy and other things as energy, because the interdimensional plane between the third and the fourth has no energy, but we just call it the lower fourth dimension for simplicity's sake. Now, the thing is, there is one exception to this. George Kavasalis from Australia, the metaphysics expert, ET contactee, he says that there's reptilians in the second, third, and fourth dimensions, but the malevolent ones do not come from the lower fourth. They actually come from the second dimension, but they impose their will while under the guise of lower fourth dimensional entities. And when I spoke with this with Alfred Weber last week, he said that you really shouldn't look at it as a perspective of what dimension the entity comes from. It's really an issue of service to self. Someone's calling me on my cell phone. I tend to agree with him. Yeah, but it's the whole service to self issue versus what dimension they come from issue. So what can you give your take on this stuff that I just mentioned about what dimension the reptilians come from and why they come from that dimension?
Well, I tend to agree with what you just quoted, Alfred. I think it doesn't matter. As I think I covered this earlier. I think this whole dimensional thing doesn't matter. It's just not something that's. It doesn't matter at all. No, I mean, if you're going to put your consciousness into something of the nature where you're going to be delving into and attracting, fear-based ideology, you're going to focus yourself there. And whether you call it espresso coffee or whether you call it fourth dimension or George, I don't care. It's just a matter to me of where are you fixating your consciousness. And if you're going to delve into this whole ideology of horror-based, extraterrestrials and what they're going to come and what they're going to do to you, what generally happens to most people, and they don't realize it, is they're basically attracting in spirits. There's a lot of spirit energy out there that takes advantage of people and will masquerade themselves as, a boo entity or something that's going to harm somebody and has a great deal of fun with it. So a part of unraveling the whole conundrum of extraterrestrial reality is also going to mean that we need to really unravel also the afterlife dimension and what's out there and what goes on. So everybody has their own belief system in this and what they want it to be. I don't get into what you were just referencing, and it really has no relevance in my world in terms of that. It's just either are you going to get into that type of thing and give it its own classification system and get involved in it, or are you going to do something productive with your time? There's all sorts of things out there in our world, Andrew, and we can decide what we get involved in. It's the same thing. This world is a replica planet. It's a replica reality. And when we discover that and when we use our consciousness to navigate where we want to be, then our life changes. And we have much more opportunity and change our whole scenario. It's really a matter of self-enlightenment. So I don't get into all the stuff that you talk about. It's just in regards to what you just asked me with the reptilians in different degrees and different dimensions. To me, it's totally irrelevant to my life.
Okay. One thing that is relevant to what you do is the subject of business, and I want to get into that because you said business, while it seems to have nothing to do with spirituality, it has everything to do with spirituality. I seem to recall you writing something about like that to that effect on your site. And just for a moment, I can get into this. Anybody with any level of common sense should be highly disturbed over the fact that our financial system is completely untenable, because when you loan people money that doesn't exist and charge interest on the loans, it makes debt and inflation unavoidable. Someone out there will never be able to pay their debt, and eventually we're all going to be screwed in terms of the economy, but yet our banking system is considered too big to fail, yet it's designed to fail. It doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to. I mean, I'm going to guess that you realize that, and that's one reason you put business as something that you really want to talk about. In regards to the business aspect of what you do, can you get into that, and did the whole thing about our financial system being untenable play into that?
Yeah. Well, as you pointed out, the financial systems that are at play, that guide the world today, are really based on some very fluffy economic theory, and there's not a lot there. What we really have to be looking at is shifting our focus of what is the currency on the planet. And this is where all my work focuses now. What I'm getting at is the currency has to be humanity. The currency has to be mankind. And when we shift ourselves to looking at what is going to be better for and elevate mankind, and I don't mean just in a generic sense, I mean in everything that we do in our life, and when we're choosing our professions, when we're choosing our life path and what we want to do, then we will be able to begin to disentangle ourselves from this huge morass of this economic balloon that has been painted that currently controls our lives. Until the focus changes, we will not be able to advance into a higher civilization. We've got to get outside of this current economic window. Now, as you alluded to, there's a lot at stake with this, and that people are not going to necessarily let go or want to have a changeover, because it can result in a great economic nuclear explosion, so to speak, in terms of what goes on there. So there's going to be, I believe, a lot of conflict, subtle conflict and some overt conflict, as this large swell of people come forth and start to decision their lives saying, you know what, this just doesn't work. I want to create a new foundation of systems, organizations, businesses, ways that we distribute our material goods on this planet and use them so that we now move to a place where it's about what do we really need to live, and how do we put ourselves in a position where we can live comfortably but be happy. We have to elevate the value of human happiness and contentment over material goods. Humanity has been manipulated for thousands and thousands of years because it's easy to do. And we've been manipulated into replacing our emotions and our needs with things. The latest a pair of boots or the latest fashion trend will make you feel better about yourself. We have to decide to disengage from that entire dialogue and take a look at what's really important, spending time with your children or getting a new car every 2 years. We have to change our view of materialism impacting our happiness. And in doing so, we're going to be seeing a lot more people moving into ventures of how they want to spend their lives in terms of making a difference to humanity and solving a common problem that makes life better for all. There's also been a lot of experimentation with different economic approaches, from barter to bitcoins. We're going to see a lot of approaches to trying to deal with this. And this is the window of opportunity that I was alluding to, is we need to be able to foster more people to go down this pathway of disengaging from the control that has been put over them to act and behave in a certain way so that they feel comfortable and brave enough to be willing to make the change. Unfortunately, in some situations, change doesn't come easy. Ask any prior revolutionary of any prior time. There's sacrifices to be made. And that's what we're going to need to take a look at. Who's willing to sacrifice to what degree for the betterment of all? As you so rightly pointed out, the economic system is a sham. But it works, and right now it's holding everybody together. And how long it will be able to do that, who knows? I believe that there is something coming up on the horizon that's going to change our lives dramatically and be one of the unraveling factors of this. And this is my personal theory. What I believe we're going to be facing is increasing environmental change, and that with the changing in the ocean levels, as has been projected, not in the New Age community, but scientifically has been projected in terms of the changing coastlines and things that we're going to have, you're going to be looking at a migration, a huge new migration in the 21st century. That migration is going to bring the opportunity for cultures to blend. It may not be very easy, but it's going to happen. And that brings the chance for us to redefine communities. And in redefining communities, we're redefining what do we need at the individual level as well as the community level. This is what I think is going to be the linchpin that's going to help make it happen, is that environmental change is going to bring out about a redefining of communities as we have an upcoming migration in the ensuing generations. And this is going to redefine our economic processes on the planet.
Yeah, Alex Collier said that we're the only civilization in the Milky Way that uses money. All the others use some form of energy as their currency. I guess it just goes to show you that Earth really is a prison planet. But speaking of which, I would like to get into a little bit of a debate here between one individual who says there is hope for humanity and another person who says there isn't. I guess I'll start with the pessimistic attitude. I'd like you to get your take on maybe who's got got this right. Jordan Maxwell. I've listened to a lot of his work. He says, I do not believe that humanity can be saved unless we get help from some higher level consciousness entity. He said the people on planet Earth, they're too paradigmatic, they're too stricken with fear, and they're too stupid. I mean, he even said 9/11 did it in for me. To see that planes could crash into buildings and then the buildings could get pulverized into dust and people could believe that official story made me lose all hope with humanity, because I cannot believe people would be so stupid to fall for that. But on the flip side, George Kavazlis has said, the New World Order, it's impossible for them to take over entirely. He claims he's felt within his heart soul essence that planet Earth is a love-based planet at its pure essence level. So that means that no matter how hard the New World Order tries to take over the world, and it will come down hard at times, he says, but in the end, infinite love will always prevail. And, of course, Jordan Maxwell could say, well, I didn't say there's no hope for humanity. I said there's no hope unless we get help from higher dimensional entities, and maybe that plays some role in this. So whose side would you be more likely to lean to, and what can you give on this whole debate here that I gave up?
Well, it's very easy to see how Jordan can get so frustrated with the world and what's out there. But what I have been taught is that this is about the spiritual maturity of the human race. And it's not a matter of getting help from those that are out there. It's a matter of us doing it ourselves and understanding what needs to be done, and also having the insight and willingness of what needs to be done, doing what needs to be done. So that this entire period of time is almost like a testing stage to see, is humanity willing to make changes that will be for the benefit of the entire species. So one of the greatest currencies, we were talking about currencies, I was talking about currencies a moment ago, and one of the greatest currencies that the human race trades on is optimism. And that needs to be harvested to motivate people, to get them to see what the reality is of what their life is versus the potential of what it can be. There are obviously different levels of awareness and self-evolution that are here simultaneously on this planet right now. And they're going to want different things and see things differently. What's key and what's pivotal is that enough people moving into the slot where they see that the potential can be manifested. The potential of mankind certainly can be manifested. But it takes a little bit of energy and investment in ourselves. You know, you can decide in a classical paradigm, somebody can sit on the couch and say, I want to be a doctor, but, that means I've got to go about the steps that it takes to be a doctor. Too much work. Same thing here with changing the world. We can hold on to optimism, and we can take a look at, what do I want to do with my life specifically that can make a positive difference? Together we are very different in the capacity of what we can execute. And the spiritual lesson I've been told that humanity has to go through right now is to understand that connectiveness and how they can pull together to create a turnaround strategy on this planet. But we have to be willing to do it. So I understand certainly, how easy it is to get frustrated and say, Jesus, is this ever going to change? For thousands and thousands of years, we've been hacking each other, the most violent, vicious, crude, disgusting, smelly species out there. Are we ever going to change? Yes, we can. And there's so much good that we have to focus on that and continue to exploit, in a way, the good that is out there and give people the opportunity to change. And giving them the opportunity to change means that they have access to information and resources. But we have to do the work. To look at that an alien race is going to come in and save us as our only salvation, I think is spiritual immaturity, and it's naive. And it's easy to look at that pathway, but they've taught me, through my experiences, that that is not the way to go. It's up to us, that we have to be responsible for showing that we can go through that window and evolve to a higher level. So I don't think it's a matter of either or. I don't think the future is written necessarily. It depends on which window you're going to look at, which window of reality, and to which probable future is out there. It's up to us to choose the probable future that's out there and make it happen. So, this is our spiritual maturity. It's up to us, not looking for outside help. We created the mess. We need to get ourselves out of the mess. And we absolutely can do it, but we have to be smart. We can't fall into the same traps that we've fallen into over and over again of letting ourselves be directed in certain areas or misdirected in certain areas. We have to decide what we want, what we're willing to do, but most importantly, we have to value the future of the species. This is the one thing that I really enjoyed about that experience with the reptilian race, was how much they valued their future and how every child was considered a valuable commodity into that future. And they understood how important it was to nurture that child, because that was their tomorrow. This is what we have to do today. This is what we have to look at in terms of redesigning the strategy of humanity for existence. I think actually the big drop in the bucket is going to be space pioneering, though, because if we get to the point where we advance to that, it's going to be easier to look at certain people leaving the planet behind and going off and seeing what's out there. But we need to tender this planet and take care of this planet and honor this planet and our position on it and what we have created. We created the mess. We can create the cleanup. It's a little bit harder, but we can do it. But it takes discipline, and discipline is one of the attributes of the ancient initiate and the spiritually devoted entity who follows enlightenment. And this is what we have to do. Did I answer your question?
And since you mentioned, but I wanted to get into how we could not just do our part on this earth, but also in other places, because trying to help out in other places besides Earth is something that I'm trying to become quite familiar with. There's a group of interdimensional, benevolent light workers and light warriors that even Andrew Bartz has made reference to their existence, known as the Silver Legion, and Tanath is the contactee on Earth for the Silver Legion. And I have decided that just to make the most of my existence, whenever my physical body sleeps on Earth, every night before going to bed, I ask the Silver Legion to recruit me for their light worker and light warrior races, and I say out loud, Silver Legion, I will help you to the best of my ability. I'll even battle malevolent reptilians for you, because they do that as part of their missions in other dimensions and other realms. And I don't remember an experience yet that I've ever had with them, but Tanath said that shouldn't come as an astonishment, because the only people who will remember their experience with the Silver Legion, for the most part, in like 99.999% of cases, are those who can astral project. If you can't astral project, don't expect to remember the experience, but I'm guessing that they are answering my plea that to recruit them at night, that they recruit me at night. But other people have said, hey, you shouldn't give your loyalty to any legion, no matter how benevolent they are. It's not necessarily a good idea to do that. And I'm thinking, well, if I straight up ask the Silver Legion, I can only assume that they'll answer my pleas. Why would I have to worry about a malevolent legion taking me? I mean, is what I'm doing a good idea, and would you recommend other people do the same thing?
Okay, well, what I'm going to propose is a bit of a hybrid approach between the two perspectives. Think of it this way. You want to do good on Earth, and there's a cult group that you say, I'm going to devote myself to what you've decided you're doing, because I agree with you, it's good for humanity. You don't necessarily need to constrict yourself to that one particular group. I always affectionately say, if you want something, never tell the universe how it's going to give it to you. You can put out there, which I think is a little bit better, the fact that you are choosing to spend your life as an instrument of good, and how you want to phrase that, what words you want to use to define that, are within your own purview of how you want to do it. There are many things out there, and that could be much higher and much more effective than the Silver Legion that you refer to, that your consciousness could become a part of or could learn from. So by choosing to say, this is what I want to do, and I'm devoting myself and my affiliation to the Silver Legion, you've limited yourself, because you don't know what's out there. It's like when we look at even here on the planet, look at the ocean. You and I look out, we're standing on the shore, we see the waves, we see the sun glinting off it, we see the ocean foam. We don't see underneath it all the layers of activity and the plankton and the whales and the species that live in the deep, deep, dark sea. We don't see what's out there. We just are aware of what's on the surface. And so it is when we decide to go in a certain direction. We just see what's there. And we've limited ourselves in our perspective, something that we started talking about. So what I advocate is that your intention is pure and beautiful. So why limit it to a certain avenue? What if there's something that's even better out there? I'm one of those people you often hear. I'm sure, we talk about guides all the time and those who work with ourselves on the other side. Oftentimes the biggest guide we have is our higher consciousness, but there are other fragments of reality and of consciousness that work with us too. I always suggest to people that you put the commission out to those. Say, whatever is in my highest good, this is my intention. I trust in my higher self, knowing what is best for me and what alliance I might be able to strike so that I can be the most useful in this lifetime. What if you devoted yourself just to a particular political party and there was something else that was much better out there? Think of it that way. So you've identified the values and the attributes and what you want to do, but why limit yourself to one vessel, one way of getting there? So that's what I advocate to you.
Well, they only do good things, so even if it is one group, I know I really can't go wrong. I don't think. I don't deny that there are other groups that would be willing to recruit me as my physical body sleeps, but that's just the one that I'm most familiar with. So that's the one I'm choosing. But since you mentioned spirit guides, I want to talk about this
Okay.
because remote viewers. There's a video on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel that teaches you how to become a remote viewer. And during the question and answer session, the remote viewer said, yes, there are angels, not angels in any Christian or religious sense, but just higher dimensional entities of light. They follow unconditional love, so they don't really get involved unless you ask them, or if there's something really bad happening and they feel an obligation to intervene, then yes, they'll intervene. They just can't always do that, because if they do that, then their consciousness essence will become suppressed down to a closer to third dimensional level, but they are there. But my philosophy is there's only two times when I ask my spirit guides to help me in general. One is before I meditate, to just protect me from fear-based energies and entities as I meditate and help me make the most of the experience. And then there's also, like before I ask the Silver Legion to recruit me, I ask my spirit guides and guardian angels to just guide me on a love-filled and not a fear-filled path, and protect my fellow humans and me from malevolent entities and fear energy and whatnot. Other than that, I really follow a philosophy of if you got to do something, just keep the angels out of this. Just suck it up. Do it yourself. Don't ask the angels for help. Just do it on your own. I mean, because I have heard that there is some truth that if you keep asking your spirit guides and angels for help all the time, even if you only ask them for help for benevolent things, it might come back to haunt you in regards to how they help you. I mean, am I really missing out on something by not asking them for help? And can it come back to haunt you if you ask them for too much help?
I don't think you're missing out on something by not asking them for help, in regards to the fact that in the human experience, it's our intention to develop ourselves as much as possible. And as much as we can do that on our own, then we learn the strength without a crutch or anything extra. Obviously it can be beneficial to ask for assistance, but sometimes we also don't know what we need to be asking for. We think we're asking for the right thing, and there could be, a better suited response. The way I like to go about it is that when positioning from asking for aid from another type of intelligent consciousness, that I may posit what I think is best for me, but I usually try to say that, whatever is the best for me, that I am willing to experience that if it will end up having me become wiser and kinder and more loving. So, I always look at what the end point of what I want to get to. So when you ask for help of these, if you want to call them angels or higher entities, I don't think that there's necessarily any limitation or harm from it. I've never heard of that happening, but I do think that we can look at it in terms of, is it coming outside you or is it coming inside you? Do you want to use this as a doorway or as a crutch? Do you need to be using it? And do we always know what is best for us? So you seem to express wisdom in how you choose and voice your words and what you're asking for and what you've reflected to me in terms of the meditation, the loving path, creating the situation. It's about you developing your ability to find the right pathway, to find what is best for you, and you eventually, through time and processes, becoming a higher being. So I don't think there's anything harmful with asking them. I think it's in how you ask it and how you phrase it, and that if you're always intending that you become the wisdom bearer and that you learn through the experience and that you learn to make the right choices, I don't think there's that much of a harm. I think I'm of the thought belief, Andrew, that a lot of times what we believe becomes crystallized in some degree of reality or another. So if we believe something is going to happen or an energy entity is going to behave in some way, we've just created that by shooting the thought out there and added to that element. And that's why, in my belief system, it's so important what we think, because I do believe we create thought forms and reality from it.
Yeah, and speaking of reality and thought forms, on another level, Tanaf, that Silver Legion contactee who I mentioned earlier on the silverlegion.org website, she has a page dedicated to explaining the whole nature of what reality is. And put it this way, there's enough places out there in this universe where even fictional stories like Little Red Riding Hood could actually be true stories, and actually in this case were. In one interview I saw Tanaf give, she said that the inspiration for the stories Little Red Riding Hood and some other stories, they are actually based on stories that actually happened in other, I don't know if it was dimensions or realms, but I bring that up because she said that there's an ethereal level above this one. Then you got sort of an astral level. There is a barrier of sorts, but then you get up to dimensions, and then above dimensions are realms. And I believe she said there's an infinite number of different realms. And then there's an area called the Outlands. And the Silver Legion has does their work in all these layers to some extent. But could you agree on that? Because if the consequence to that being an infinite number of realms, that means that all those people who say, well, there never was a Jesus, all those fictional stories are just created by the Illuminati to brainwash people. Well, no. I mean, in some realm, there would have to be a story with, like, Jesus or something. And even George Cavazos said, if you're devoutly Christian and you die, your soul will enter a environment that reflects your Christian beliefs, and it won't be a bad environment, even though Christianity was created by the Illuminati to some extent because you believed in good things. But since that's what you believe, that's the realm or dimension you will go in. Can you offer any comments or statements on this that I've just said?
Yeah, and I actually wrote about that over a decade ago in Confessions of an Intergalactic Anthropologist, using actually the Jesus drama, and that I had been taught by those who work with me that there's so many different versions of what happened because they all happened within different vaults of time, and whichever one you're tapping into will become your reality of what actually took place back then. There are infinite vaults that are out there, and we not only tap into them and come back with them as our reality, as I indicated before, we help create them too. So, yeah, and, where we want to go is so important. That's why my training from the time I was so young focused on the ability to control myself and master the ability of, no matter where I end up, if we want to call it in the universe, in the cosmos, or wherever, I have the ability to navigate and get myself to a place of where I want to be. Humans have always oriented themselves conventionally along the lines of up, down, north, south, east, west. In reality, does not function that way. And that's where a lot of times we have problems coming back and trying to relate what we've experienced or another type of dimension or anything that's out there. This will become less of a barrier as we become more acquainted with outer space, or even inner space. You can almost use it interchangeably because there's more of an inside and an outside, and there's not necessarily an up, down, right, left in our orientation fields and how we interpret things that happen to us. Our entire way of thinking will be radicalized as we move into uncovering the layers of reality to a greater degree. And as I pointed out earlier, one of the greatest ironies to me of how that's going to come about is through the rapid onset of artificial intelligence that's being introduced to societies today. So we're going to go a great direction, not just from people like you and I having these types of esoterically laced conversations, but even to the greater mainstream in the coming years with these types of things and these types of thoughts. But going back to the main issue, there are many, many levels out there, and it's our ability to focus our stage of awareness, our center point, as to where we want to be and how we want to get there. And this is one of the early core teachings that ancient initiates went through because they had to learn how to control themselves when they got out of the body. You talked about astral travel and astral projection. In ancient times, during the mystery schools and the hidden teachings, this is one of the very earliest and very first things that candidates had to focus on. You had to master getting out of your body, controlling yourself, and getting back to this particular coordinate in time-space so that you could continue on your journey here and what you had created and making the loop back. So it's a whole concept of time, space, reality, astral travel, multidimensional sequences. It's fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating. And as humans, we just tend to get so caught up in the everyday circumstances that are before us and feeding on what is given to us to create that everyday ordinary reality, we miss out on the greater experience of being human. And this is what we were talking about before in terms of that all needs to change. We need to disengage from programmed reality that's programmed by others for their own purpose of what they want to have here on this planet, what they want us to do, how they want us to think, how they want us to behave. And we have to become an optimized species in terms of learning how to disengage from that and create the best, strongest, healthiest human that there can be that functions well in its circumstances.
Okay, we've got about 11 minutes left, so just to speed it up here, let's try to do two subjects on the fly. I saw you talk about reincarnation briefly on your website. Andrew Bartzis says reincarnation, it exists, but it is not our friend because it was imposed on this planet by the archontic forces, the malevolent archontic forces to keep us from attaining higher states of consciousness. I'm sure he's right because he's an Akashic Records reader, but can you offer any comment on that?
I don't agree with that. I think it's a cosmic law and
Really?
a cosmic principle. Yeah. You know, every one of us comes to our own conclusions and what we see and what we find. And we talked about this earlier, even in terms of you can even get an Akashic Record reader. You could get another Akashic Record reader, and sometimes they don't see the same thing. But from where I come from, I believe that it is a cosmic principle. What I think is different, and I don't go into in great detail usually because it's usually like a second or deeper layer of teaching after some of the initial stuff I go into, is that reincarnation isn't sequential. We will talk about it for convenience sakes as past, present, and future. But if time is happening all around us in multiple vaults, then where's the past, where's the present, and where's the future? I actually learned about this from extraterrestrial teachers who acquainted me with becoming familiar with that perspective. And so if it happens all simultaneously, that gives us new eyes to look at in terms of, I don't always call it reincarnation, in terms of incarnation. I was taught how you can reach out from one sphere of experience, or let's call it an incarnational life, and have a change that can actually impact other lifetimes in the past and even in the future and alter an entire time sequence. So back to the original premise that you threw at me is my belief system, my perspective is that it's a universal condition that comes with incarnating on the planet where we are in terms of repeated experiences. The repeated experiences, however, aren't necessarily the same. You know, you don't always look the same. You don't always are. We like to romanticize and think, okay, that was me back in 1643 or 2 BC, and I looked the same, and I had, the same viewpoint. We can be very, very, very different from what we are now, but we share a connection to what I like to call the oversoul, to a larger state of consciousness that's in our wheel, our sphere of who we are and conscious creation. And so it allows connective spokes between our lifetimes to impact each other. So, I could even go back and talk to myself as a youngster, and I wouldn't know who I was necessarily. I would just see myself as a spirit entity or something, or I had well, this isn't going to sound crazy to you or your audience, but I had an encounter with one of my earliest encounters was with a lifetime of who I was in ancient Egypt. Used to come in and guide me when I was young. But I don't think it's a system imposed necessarily as he phrased it. I think it's I tend to think at this point is a universal principle.
Okay. All right, we got time for one more question. See if you can cover this in about 5 minutes. I want to talk about timelines for a moment, because getting back to Andrew Bartzis, he said that there are, on Earth there are 3 timelines left. There's the main organic one, and then there's what he calls an upper and a lower timeline. However, other people, George Kavaslis included, have said that those upper and lower timelines, they are a grouping of timelines. They're not. He doesn't understand why Andrew Bartzis would say that they're just one timeline, when in reality they're a grouping of timelines that will eventually all go back in on each other, and even those upper and lower timelines will eventually go back to the main organic timeline. But can you offer any take on regards to timeline instances on Earth right now? You got 4.5 minutes. Let's close on that note.
From what I've been taught is that there are, you can call them timelines or major potentials. Some have greater strength than others. Those that have greater strength are more likely of unfolding before us. However, they always have the potential of changing. So I don't see it as 2, 1, 3, whatever. There are a number of them out there, but there is usually a very strong, predominant one that also has its echo timelines coming out beside it. The predominant one takes a lot more energy to change it, whether we're going to deflect it or move it in a different direction. And it takes greater impotence of actions here on the planet. For example, say we had a certain type of calamity heading our way. Could it be changed? Yes. Is it likely to be changed? No. We don't necessarily have that collective strength of the energy current altering the one that's heading our way. So I see where you could say there's one in terms of there's usually a predominant pathway. Maybe there's some correlation between how I see it and how it's being expressed. But I don't see it as an absolute. Things can be changed. They just take more energy to change them. And there are usually subsequent tributaries, parallel realities, things that are unfolding at the same time that we could be tapping into. So I don't follow the expressive thought that you mentioned that the others have in terms of there's 1, there's 2. I follow along the line that there's multiples, but there's a predominant tendency that we tend to attract into ourselves that creates the future timeline, but can be altered. And again, that some alteration of it can be requiring a lot of strength, a lot of change that takes place on the planet. And that's why some things almost seem like they're written in stone.
All right.
Did that make sense to you from my perspective?
It does. And there's a lot of things about time that we simply do not understand. Well, for one, it's
absolutely.
The deepest, darkest
we're all novices.
secret as much.
Yeah, we're all novices, and those of us that claim to be experts are fooling ourselves. We're all novices trying to figure it out based on experience and thought. This is actually kind of fun.
Yeah, and the powers that be use time travel to a great extent to further their agenda. That's why it's the deepest, darkest state secret, as Alfred Weber just said, as I said a couple seconds ago. But Marcia, we don't actually have... I tried to make a comment. I actually said that many years ago. I said the great mystery is not the extraterrestrial reality. It's what comes with it. And with it is one of those things is time travel. But it is being introduced into the popular culture right now so that the future will be very different as people will begin to understand it. It's being introduced in television programs and in media in a way that it hasn't been before because it's part of our future. But there's a lot that comes with it. Yeah, there is. Laura Eisenhower told us that Timeline Jumpers were actually trying to sabotage our event in Sarasota, the Return to Atlantis conference. They'll probably try to do the same thing to some extent when I'm in L.A. One Saturday from this upcoming Saturday. But Anyway, we don't have time for any more questions, Marcia. I wish we did, but I always said I would end my show before 8, so someone I know can have my listeners listen to their show in its entirety at 8. I made that promise with them. So, unfortunately, we cannot continue. And the fact is, I tell this to all my guests at the end of the show, don't expect to hear from me in the near future to come on my show again, because my goal is to try to get as many different people on the show as possible before giving any one specific guest double dips, because I think that's the fairest way to go about this. Get as many people, different people on. So, love to have you on again. But there's a lot of other fascinating.
I was just going to say, I laud the fact that you're, opening up streams to get people to take a look at different perspectives, and I wish you the best, and I thank you very much for having me on tonight.
Thank you very much, Marcia, and let's enjoy the rest of our trek into 4D and 5D Earth, as everybody's talking about. And let's not obsess. Let's just enjoy it while we can. Enjoy the experience.
All right, you take care.
See you later.
Okay,
you take care. Bye. Well, folks, I hope you learned something from that. I certainly did. Always love to go from a spiritual perspective, and Marcia's great at that from all sorts of point of view. Just like I try to cover a wider range of things on this show to expose the nature of reality. But since I got a couple minutes left, I could have left her on a little longer, but there's something I need to get into that I mentioned at the end of my show last week. That there's a website I made, AndrewFisher2014.com. I should have made it .org, and I'll explain why in a second, but trying to change that. But if anybody wants to look at it, it's Andrew Fisher and then the number 2014.org. It's a political campaign site. Yeah, I have decided that I am going to try to make a grassroots campaign for the Pennsylvania United States House of Representatives as a candidate from Pennsylvania, run as a third-party candidate for the U.S. House of Reps. It'll take a miracle for me to win this election, but I decided to do this anyway and spend $197 to make my campaign website just to try to get this done, just to have an experience here and get the word out to people by campaigning, even though that I know that winning the election will be pretty much impossible. Well, who knows? Maybe miracles will happen. Maybe the guardian angels will somehow be with me and pull off a miracle that will enable someone other than an Illuminati puppet to win. I'd like to call my party the Infinite Consciousness Party, to try to wake people up to who they really are and keep this as grassroots as possible by spending as little money as possible while asking people for as little money as possible. That's what grassroots is about. So I guess people hope you can support me with that somehow. And sometime in the middle of February is when I can legally start getting signatures to get my name on the ballot. I would need 1,000 signatures for this. And I'm sure that won't be a problem. I got some help with some liberty groups around the area who I'm sure will be able to get that required number to get me on the May primary. But, well, I'm not going to talk about this much during the show. I'll just try to say if anybody wants to understand what I stand for, just listen to my radio show. So with that, next week on the 22nd, I hopefully will be able to get Eddie Craig of Rule of Law Radio on. He was supposed to be the guest on my first ever episode a few months ago, but he didn't come on. It was a family emergency, he said. I don't really want to get into that or anything, but hopefully he will be able to come on my show. We will be discussing how the law is designed to screw you over at every turn, how they are not on the side of the defendant, how the government lies to you at every turn, and how the law is written in a way to get you to obey laws that don't even apply to you, and among other things, make you do things in a commercial capacity when you're not in commerce. The laws are written that way, so they will screw you over. That's how they do it with the driving scam, which is what Eddie Craig is known for exposing. If anybody wants to check out Eddie Craig's work, there's a fascinating video on YouTube on the Alex Jones channel called Secrets Police Don't Want You to Know. It's 2.5 hours long, but it's definitely worth your time, and I'm sure you'll want to keep listening to it as you watch it, because he teaches you how you only need a license, registration, insurance, and license plate on your car if and only if you're a commercial driver, and if it's illegal for the cops to pull you over and issue tickets because you have the right to travel in your own personal car for non-commercial purposes, and transportation laws only apply to commercial drivers. And I've talked about this before on my show, but just want to get it out. So hopefully Eddie Craig will be on. We'll briefly touch on that because you can get most of the info from that video. Don't want to spend too much time talking about that if he's on. We'll spend more time talking about other law-related subjects to discuss the nature of reality from a legal perspective and how it's designed to screw you over. So he's on the books. Hopefully he won't have to cancel again. Hopefully he'll be able to get on. He's becoming pretty popular, it seems. He's on some foreign radio shows because stuff he teaches is not just applicable to Texas, where he's from. It's for everyone because everyone has the same rights no matter where you live. So with that being said, enjoy the full moon tonight. I'll be meditating at the exact time of the full moon. I believe that's about 11:52. So moon's also an artificial body, but I don't have time to get into that. So without further ado, namaste, everybody, and hope you learned something. And please tune in to my future shows. Namaste.